we wanted to do is just take no more than an hour, but give you a bit of a high-level overview about this a unique sort of partnership opportunity that we at the Deepening Community Practice Area of Tamarack are looking to find community partners who will join us in these what we call action learning projects. And then after giving you sort of a high-level overview, just want to take some time to answer any questions or get any feedback from any of you. And then by all means, we are committed to hosting a minimum of 5 partnerships with local communities each year for the next 5 years, and specifically would like to confirm 2 additional communities by spring of this year, by March of this year, to at least confirm that we're going to do the work. We're currently actively working in Peterborough and are about to do some work with the City of Kamloops in BC. We're also doing a similar project that's very neighborhood focused with 2 high priority neighborhoods in Baltimore that follows this framework and methodology. So from our perspective, what we really want to do is to first kind of give you a set of context for why we're hosting these local deepening community initiatives and how it fits within Tamarac's Deepening Community Practice Area. Really kind of spend some time capturing the rationale and the process and the roles of the local project leaders. Share an example with you of a local deepening community initiative that we completed last year, and then just open it up to dialogue amongst yourselves and with, you know, in terms of the questions that are bubbling for you. So for those of you who don't know much about Tamarack, we are a national charity and learning institute, and our work focuses on the 5 big idea areas you see listed below. And in addition to these 5 idea areas, we really, one of the strengths Tamarack brings is our capacity to translate theory into action. And one of the ways that we've really cultivated that knowledge and expertise is by supporting practice areas where we build learning networks with members across Canada and beyond who are actively translating these theories into action in their own neighborhoods and in their own communities. And then we capture those and promote those learnings out. So in terms of understanding our practice area, I just wanted to give you a high-level overview of who are we and what are we focused on. So as a practice area, Deepening Community is focused on 2 things primarily. What we want to do is build learning and effective practice for neighborhood and community leaders and enhance that learning and practice by connecting them to each other and by promoting and sharing resources, programs, and policies for positive community and neighborhood change both nationally and internationally. So there's a whole set of ideas that are kind of interconnected and kind of nest under this notion of deepening community. And I just want to kind of capture some of these for you. So one is we believe that community and neighbors are the building blocks for creating belonging and inclusion. I know recently, in part because of the work of Susan Pinker and her Canadian bestseller, The Village Effect, as well as some work being championed by the community foundations, part of what we're starting to see is that people's sense of belonging and inclusion has a very tangible and powerful link in terms of their overall health and well-being. We also know that people's sense of belonging and inclusion is a key factor in the resiliency of communities. So we want to know and understand much more about what that link is. Another idea that we're playing with is this sense that if we deepen our experience of community, it offers individuals an opportunity to enhance their physical, mental, and economic health, and also their sense of happiness and fulfillment. One of, I think, the key ideas as well that we're recognizing is that organizations and citizens each have a role to contribute to building the kinds of communities that we want, and that they work citizens work in very different ways, much more organic ways than organizations, and that the strength of our communities is calling us to get much wiser about how the informal citizen networks collaborate effectively with local organizational players. We believe that if we can understand much more about what it takes to build community and what those strengths and assets are, that it can become a guiding force around shaping the work of organizations, governments, and institutions, and that our effectiveness in deepening community can be accelerated if what we do is build the network, the learning network that shares resources, programs, and policies across peers. So what we want to do is we want to form a national network of folks, both citizens and organizational leaders, who are experimenting with new ways of working together, share those insights, demonstrate the capacity and the possibility of what happens when citizens and organizations work effectively together, and really profile that unique and distinct role that citizens need to play in creating positive change. So one of the ways in which we're sort of building some examples of effective practice is we are partnering with local communities, and we like to call these local deepening community initiatives action learning projects that are both highly aspirational but at the same time profoundly practical. So they're really tapping into people's hopes and aspirations, but at the same time we recognize the importance of making them really concrete and real. So I've talked about this a little bit. We do want to partner with up to 5 local communities each year to host these local projects with us. And we believe that the goals of these projects, the results of these projects, are that you will start seeing increased community engagement within those communities. You'll have a much better sense of the social capital that exists within the community, and also some concrete opportunities to strengthen and reweave that social fabric. Really, we see these local projects as also offering an opportunity to build consensus across a diversity of your citizens in terms of opportunities for the kind of vision you want to create for the future, but also what specific projects might people want to work on together as a way to realize that vision. And then ultimately, we see that this is how we will begin to cultivate a broader, richer sense of the community's natural leadership between organizations and citizens. So at the very core, what's driving our curiosity about this idea of deepening community is a recognition that the majority of challenges that are being faced by different sectors and by our communities as a whole are complex, and therefore no one sector working alone can have the kind of impact on them that is needed. So the assumption that we bring as well then is that the community needs to find new opportunities to practice working together, and that through that work and how that work is done, there's a real opportunity to create new relationships of trust across unusual partners in the community. And typically what we find when this happens is that you actually end up identifying and sort of tapping into previously underutilized resources in your community. And ultimately, this comes in part from encouraging citizens to contribute the gifts, talents, and skills that they have as an active force in creating the kind of future that they themselves say that they want. So at the core, if we step back, what this means is for organizations, it's an opportunity to work differently, moving from being the doers or the deliverers of services and programs to much more being catalysts and facilitators, braiding together the existing resources in the communities to help get the work done. So you're not working alone anymore. You are taking some time. Obviously, as organizations, you do have meaningful resources and knowledge and skill to contribute, but you're not trying to do it in isolation of other skills and talents in the community. From a citizen perspective, what we find is embracing this kind of a deepening community approach moves a citizen from being a recipient, and we laugh sometimes, you know, it's like seeing themselves solely as taxpayers or voters, to being a provider of information, moving along that continuum beyond that, to actively participating in creating the kind of future that they want, and ultimately cultivating the leadership of citizens to help co-create that future. So why would a local community undertake a project like this? Simply, it helps to build consensus and practice across citizenry to get things done, creates opportunities to build new relationships from between people that wouldn't typically work together, and over time nurture those relationships of trust to create a sense of belonging. It really does give people meaningful work to do together, deepens people's knowledge about the neighborhood and the skills and talents of its residents, and experiment with new ways in working together. I mean, one of the things that we all recognize is that, you know, the demands on many of us seem to be growing in terms of constituencies wanting different things from you, and yet the resources very often don't keep pace with those demands. So this creates a new opportunity to find resources in unusual ways to help make that future happen. Let me then take us to the next step, which is, let me share just one story of the impact of a local deepening community initiative. So this is a project that we undertook in the Grey Bruce region, which is northwest of Toronto by about 2.5 hours. As you can see, it's a pretty diverse geography, and the lead partner that we worked with on this project was the Grey Bruce Health Unit and their Healthy Communities Partnership. So what their team did was actually divide their odd region into 4 quadrants, geographic quadrants, and over the course of, I believe it was about 6 months, they hosted 47 conversations across the region, and you can see the breakdown there, and engaged a total of 407 participants overall. So one of the things that came out was a really clear sense from all participants around the kind of region that folks seem to align around what they wanted Grey Bruce to look like in the future. And you can see some of the examples there that are sort of the themes that kept reappearing conversation after conversation. Ultimately, we then spent some time in each one of the conversations asking those conversation participants. You'll see there on the far left is a drawing that one group did about sort of their vision for the future. Ultimately, we said, okay, so if that's the vision of the future, when you think about where we are today, what are the 6 priorities that as a region we need to be focusing on if we're going to get to the kind of community that we envision? And you will see there the 6 sort of broad idea areas that there was really strong, consistent consensus around across the breadth of the region. Now here's something that's really interesting. One of the unique features that the folks at Grey Bruce did alongside us is they incorporated a survey into the conversations process, and there were 3 questions that they asked all participants before the conversation got underway. And then at the end of the conversation, sort of an hour later, they retested the participants, asking them the same questions. So what you'll see is after the impact of one conversation, people's feelings of connection to the other people who participated in the conversation increased by 11%. People's sense of awareness around the experiences and perspectives of others who were part of the conversation grew by 22%, and that there was a 5% increase in the level of commitment and interest that participants reported around wanting to be part of efforts to strengthen the community. So we found that really powerful. A second example, very different in its scale and scope, is we did a similar project in Dalburn, Alberta, grand population 830 residents, a very rural community kind of sandwiched between Calgary and Red Deer. And so as a result, what the folks in Dalburn were seeing was a real atrophy of jobs and opportunities as many of their residents either headed to Calgary or Red Deer for work. And this was a real effort led in partnership by the Municipal Council in Dalburn and FCSS, which is a municipal provincial community and social services network. So what was really powerful, they got agreement from the conversations that they hosted. They got citizens to endorse the conversation patterns and themes that were presented when the data was reported back at a community celebration at the end of the project. At that community celebration, based on the data shared, 7 possible project ideas were identified. And the other thing that I think was particularly important about the Dalburn story is that the municipality, when they championed the project, was somewhat nervous. They were a newly elected council, and their biggest fear as a council of 5 individuals was that after hosting or offering leadership for a conversations dialogue, that at the end of the day, all the residents would then turn around to them, point their fingers and say, well, we've told you what those projects are. When are you going to get them done for us? So we were very deliberate throughout this process to make it clearly understood that a group of 5 to 7 people couldn't possibly get everything done, and that this was also an opportunity for residents to really step up and offer their own leadership around advancing projects that came out. One of the highlights that the mayor, longstanding mayor, noted when coming to the community celebration at the end of the project was the extent to which citizen leadership did show up. And what was particularly inspiring for him was it wasn't the same old people who always get involved and lead everything in the community. There were some fresh faces, new faces in the community who were really keen to roll up their sleeves and contribute to the community. And at the community celebration as well, as people began to action plan around the 7 project ideas, some provincial partners who were curious and interested in the project actually showed up at the gathering and were able to offer net new grant funds that would be a nice fit for some of the projects that began to emerge. But overall, I think one of the things that was really powerful for the folks in Dalburn is that they were able to mobilize a total of 48% of their residents participating. So they hosted 20 conversations that engaged 260 people. They also allowed people who didn't necessarily participate in a conversation to give their input via survey. So 245 surveys were collected. And then for them, their hook to get people involved in the project was inviting people to have their photos taken by a professional portrait photographer as part of a Belonging Dalburn project. And you'll see 130 people were part of that. And what I love, the eldest I think was 94 and the youngest was like 8 months. But what they did was they used those photos then to create murals, which they posted all over town. And you'll see there's a great story about the impact of that. But it was really powerful because it really was a concrete and tangible way in which the citizens of Dalburn showed that they were claiming ownership for their own community. So we were really thrilled to be part of that project. I don't know that there's time, but we can send this out afterward, and you'll see that this is a video that was compiled and shared at the community celebration in Dalburn, where people got to view the photos for the first time. Okay, so those are 2 of the more recent examples of what these kinds of projects look like. And I think for me, the big thing I would love for you all to take away from that is while there is a core commonality around sort of the data, the approach, and how it's documented and shared back, there's also within that tremendous capacity for variance each community bringing their own nuance or thoughts and ideas to how these projects unfold. So now what I'd love to do is just take a minute and run you through the concrete. Okay, so if we were going to say yes to this, what are the nuts and bolts? What does this really invite and expect of us, and what can we expect from you folks at Tamarack if we enter into a partnership with you? So I think first and foremost, what I wanted to show was sort of the typical roadmap for what these projects look like and the timeline. So typically it takes anywhere, like a short timeline would be 6 months if people were gung-ho and ready to go, and you know, at max it would be 9 months to a year to take on a project like this. So step one is the forming of a leadership team, a project team. And now in our experience, it's probably strongest if that leadership project team is diverse and pulls people in from different sectors who each, you know, to offer some leadership. But we've also worked directly with folks where it's led by a single organization. So once the original team kind of gets pulled together and maps out and scopes the geography and the number of conversations they want to have and the kind of focus and emphasis, and tailors the generic methodology to something that really fits their needs, through months 2 through 6 are opportunities where conversations in the community are hosted, and the results of those conversations are documented and synthesized. So between months 6 and 8, once the data from the various community conversations has been pulled together and synthesized, what we start to do is begin to identify patterns and themes and commonalities across the data that we can then mirror back. So in months 8 and 9, we typically encourage the hosting of community celebrations where anyone who's participated in a conversation has an opportunity to come back, hear and learn about what the consensus is emerging from the conversations. Often it's surprising that people are really positively surprised and inspired by the fact that their idea for what they thought was needed in the community might be one that is shared and owned by several other people in the community as well. And then typically, the celebrations also include an action planning component where the people who come out to the celebrations can chime in and give their thoughts and ideas and begin to action out the priorities for projects that might that people might champion as a result of the community conversations process. And then beyond that, what we move into is providing some frameworks to help support the implementation of those project ideas, often drawing on and echoing sort of some of the important lessons that we've learned through taking a collective impact approach, which spans multiple sectors. So that's kind of an overview of what the projects look like typically. So at the local level, the role of the local leadership team is to kind of form the partnerships that they need to offer leadership to the project and secure funding to help make the project happen, work with amongst themselves and in partnership with us at Tamarack to define the best timeline and or geographic scope of the local project you want to take on, and then work to refine your approach to ensure that you're working and drawing on as broad a cross-section of the community as you hope to. This is also where there's opportunities to, I think, really tailor and personalize what your unique approach looks like, really kind of work with us to consolidate around a work plan and a set of regular check-in calls to make sure things are moving along. And then with the support of our staff here, well, you folks would document the conversations. We would provide support to you around synthesizing and analyzing what you were hearing and being able to mirror it back, and then working with you to design and then also show up and participate and help present back the data from your conversations process in one or a series of community celebrations. So typically, we are asking all our local communities interested in undertaking this to secure between your partners $10,000 towards undertaking a project like this. And in the spirit of partnership, we at Tamarack commit a minimum of $10,000 in matching resources of staff time and to help support you in making this project work for you in your community. So there you go. So this is where we talk about the cost. Now 15, some of that is if you consider the in-kind resources that various community partners might want to bring to the table. So Tamarac's role then is to provide facilitation, coaching, and resources to the local project leadership team, supporting synthesis and analysis of your local community data, co-designing and co-facilitating the community celebrations, and profiling and linking your local project and the leaders of your local project network to our larger national network of other communities that are undertaking similar projects. So there you go. In a nutshell, that is kind of an overview of what the process looks like. So now's my chance to finally be quiet and see if there are any comments, questions that are emerging from you all as we've kind of done this run through. Someone, I see, Jeff, you're kind of asking about access to the survey tools. We can certainly share some of the frameworks that we've been working with, knowing that they continually evolve as well. But yes, happy to share some of those surveys as well. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts or ideas or reactions to this overview?
Well, I do have another question from Jeff. All right, Jeff, let me unmute you. You should be able to speak now.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Hey, Jeff.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm fine, and thanks for this presentation. My question is, because the work that I'm doing in it's the Rechdale community of Toronto, and the people that I'm collaborating with now within some collective impact initiatives, we already have a theme, and two themes actually. One is youth unemployment. The other theme is physical activity or trying to reduce sedentary behavior. Is it my understanding that Deepening Community kind of starts without a theme, and which is good, but it would require me kind of bringing in a third initiative, which would be much more very broad in its scope until the community citizens participating within the conversations start to identify the theme that's more important to them. Is my understanding correct?
Generically, we have started in a more open way, but I don't think the fact that you have chosen a theme necessarily precludes using this framework. So I think that the challenge is, in the spirit of transparency, to be really upfront in how we tailor a project like yours, or a project like this to your existing work, is to be really upfront and direct about the fact that this, that because of previous work or whatever, we are choosing to focus very intentionally on this issue or these sets of questions.
Okay, thank you.
So absolutely, there's lots of flexibility. I think the framework is, the framework would be similar. The approach would be similar. It's just about being really transparent.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things that we haven't spoken a lot about the Peterborough Project yet, because it is still underway, but I think one of the really interesting and exciting nuances that they're bringing as they take this methodology and tailor it to their project and their work is the decision. They actually did a call out and got up to 30 interested community volunteers who wanted to participate in a training and offer to be hosts of community conversations. So they're actually using the community conversations framework and process, but doing it as a capacity building exercise to strengthen a network of people across the community who are actively engaged in making this work happen. So Jeff, when I think about the focus and interest that you have specifically around youth employment, you can imagine how powerful it would be as part of this process to engage a group of youth in leading these dialogues with their peers and with others as part of how the data gets collected and brought in. Really, I think the fundamental is that being given the opportunity to give your input and to share your own experience and thoughts and ideas is the first and often a very essential component of how people do become engaged and do build understanding, which is a really important foundation piece for future action. We would love to hear back from you and would love the opportunity to collaborate and work with you all. So have a great afternoon, everyone.